United States, Oak Grove, Tennessee, June 10, 2003. Many believe that we are alone in the universe. However, one day something inexplicable happened. Something that forced us to ask ourselves, is this really true? The Harper farm in Oak Grove was a place where life moved at its own slow pace, and each day reflected the routine and peaceful work of farming. The vast wheat fields, managed by John Harper, stretched all the way to the horizon, with golden stalks waving in the wind like a sea of shimmering waves. The work on the farm was hard and demanded constant dedication, but John and his family poured their hearts into it. John Harper, a middle-aged man with a solid, robust build that clearly showed his years of farm work, was a man full of determination and diligence. His days began early in the morning and ended late at night. John was well known in the area for his conscientiousness and commitment to every task he undertook. He loved working outdoors, and his farming skills were the result of years of hard work and passion. His wife, Mary Harper, was his greatest support and driving force. Her warmth and kindness brightened every day on the farm. Mary was a person with great empathy and a knack for solving problems. Her days were filled with managing the household, cooking meals, and overseeing the daily chores that made the Harper home a place full of love and warmth. Her culinary talent was legendary in the community, and her delicious baked goods were always welcome at any local event. Their children, Sam and Lily, were the source of joy and energy for the family. Sam, a teenager with a passion for mechanics, spent hours helping his father repair farm machinery and learning how to operate new tools. He dreamed of becoming an engineer. Lily, his younger sister, was full of curiosity and enthusiasm. She was fascinated by the natural world and had an endless stream of questions about everything around her. Each day, the Harper family shared responsibilities, but also moments of joy and laughter together. In the evenings, they often gathered by the fireplace, sharing stories and making plans for the future. Although their life was sometimes hard, their strong family bonds and shared dreams were what mattered most to them. One night, as darkness covered the farm, John and Mary slept peacefully, unaware that the coming hours would bring change. It was one of those sleepless nights that happened from time to time, but there was something different about this one. John awoke as the clock struck 2 in the morning. Strange, unsettling sounds were coming from outside, quiet but distinct, as if something in the distance was striking a metal object. He took a deep breath, trying to figure out where the sounds were coming from. Mary, who was awake beside him, also heard the unusual noises. In the darkness, the sounds were interrupted by a silence that seemed almost menacing. Despite his surprise, John decided to check what was happening. He got out of bed, put on warm clothes, and went outside. John grabbed a flashlight and headed toward the eastern field, where the noises were coming from. Every step seemed louder in the stillness, and every shadow felt more ominous. When he reached the field, he stopped to listen closely. The noise, which had been clearly audible before, now seemed faint and distant, as if whatever had made it had vanished. Concerned, John shone his flashlight across the field. Then, he noticed something unusual. A vast area of wheat had been flattened by some force. The crop inside the pattern was bent in one direction, as if something massive had pressed it down to the ground. He walked closer. He realized that the flattened wheat formed a pattern so precise, it seemed almost unreal. At first, John thought it might be an optical illusion, but the closer he got, the more he could see its details. It was a circle, perfectly round, surrounded by smaller circles that were symmetrically arranged. John felt a cold shiver run down his spine. He held his head in disbelief and began to examine the pattern, walking along its edges. He noticed that the wheat stalks were gently smoothed down, but not damaged in any way, as if someone had used a precise tool to create the pattern. With every step, John's unease grew. Though he understood that what he was seeing was difficult to explain, he couldn't find any rational explanation. He ran home for his wife. He took off his gloves and put on a warmer jacket, feeling cold not just from the weather, but from the emotions that began to overwhelm him. He rushed inside, where Mary and the children were already awake, startled by the noises. Mary, still in her robe and reluctantly pulled from the warmth of their bed, immediately joined her husband. Together, with flashlights in hand, they headed toward the eastern field, their lights flickering erratically in the darkness. When they reached the spot, Mary was just as shocked. The circle in the field was even more impressive in full view. Her eyes widened in terror when she saw the perfect circles on the ground. Without a word, she moved closer and began examining the pattern, gently touching the grain and feeling how it had been smoothed. "What does this mean?" Mary asked, her voice trembling with emotion. "I don't understand how something could create such a pattern. How could something make this pattern in such a short time?" "I don't know," John answered with growing unease. It's something unexplainable. It looks like something not from this world created this pattern." He began wandering around the field, inspecting the circles closely, while Lily, holding tightly to her mother's hand, watched everything with a mix of curiosity and fear. Sam, though more intrigued, noticed subtle details of the pattern, while Lily, clinging to her mother, sensed that something was very wrong. As John examined the area more closely, he started noticing details that deepened his anxiety. The grain inside the circles was smoothed in a way that seemed impossible to achieve with any tool John knew. The pattern was so precise that it resembled neither a natural phenomenon nor the work of animals. John also checked the ground around the circles, searching for any traces that might explain how they were made. Yet, all signs pointed to something that must have been invisible to the human eye. There were no signs of tools or equipment. "Mary, this doesn't look like something an animal or a person could have done," John said, his voice filled with concern. "It's something more complex, something that can't easily be explained. These circles are too perfect, too mathematically precise. And how is it possible that something like this appeared so suddenly?" Mary looked at him with growing fear. Sam and Lily also felt the weight of the atmosphere surrounding the field. The children sensed that something about this situation was very unsettling. "Do you think we should call for help?" Mary asked, her voice sounding increasingly uncertain. "Maybe there are some services that can explain this?" "I don't know what we would tell them," John replied, frowning. "We need to understand what's happening first. Maybe it will just disappear when the day breaks." Time passed, and night turned into morning. The Harper family, though tired, remained in the field, examining the circles and trying to find any explanation for what they had seen. The light of the rising sun began to disperse the darkness, but the mysterious pattern was still present, as if transitioning from one state to another. "Let's go back home," John suggested, trying to keep calm in his voice. "Maybe we should rest and see what the day brings." At that moment, they noticed faint tracks in the grain, leading from the circles toward the western edge of the field. "Something isn't right here," Mary said, her voice trembling. "These tracks, they lead somewhere." John nodded and took a deep breath. "We need to check it out. This might be our only chance to find something out." They started following the tracks, which led them through the Thida field, passing golden stalks of wheat. The tracks were barely visible, but with each step, they became more pronounced, as if something invisible yet tangible had passed through the grain. When they reached the end of the path, they saw that the grain had been cut in the shape of a tight circle, which seemed to connect with the rest of the pattern in the field. At that moment, John stopped, carefully scanning the surroundings. Mary, standing beside him, held his hand tightly, feeling the rising tension. Suddenly, they all felt the same, a strange sensation, as if they were being watched. They froze, scanning the field with their eyes. Then they noticed something unusual, a slight movement in the grain, somewhere at the eastern end of the field. It looked like a shadow or a twisted motion, too fast to be natural. "Do you see that?" Mary asked, her voice barely audible. "Something is moving." John stared at the field, trying to make out more details. Suddenly, a barely visible, irregular shadow appeared in the grain, something that wasn't an animal or a human. The shadow moved toward them, slowly but steadily. "We need to get back," John said, his voice firm but filled with worry. "That thing, it could be dangerous." Mary nodded, and they both started heading back toward the house, never taking their eyes off the moving shadow in the grain. As they got closer, they suddenly heard a strange sound, a low, vibrating hum. Emerging from the stalks of wheat was a figure, remarkably short and slender, with gray-green skin and large black eyes. The creature seemed to emanate a strange aura, staring at them with a terrifying silence. John's heart raced, and Mary let out a soft scream, grabbing her husband's hand. "What is that?" she asked, her voice filled with panic. Without waiting for an answer, John started running toward the house, pulling Mary and the children with him. "Run!" he shouted. "We need to get back to the house now!" When they reached the house, they locked the doors and bolted the windows. The inside of the house was warm and safe, but the sense of danger still lingered. Mary and John sat at the kitchen table while Sam and Lily stood beside them, watching them with concern. "What was that?" Lily asked, her voice trembling. "What's happening?" John looked at his family, feeling his heart still racing. "I don't know," he replied, "but we need to be careful. What we saw wasn't normal." The night stretched around the Harper farm like a thick, almost tangible darkness. John Harper sat at the kitchen table, his tired face buried in his hands. Mary, equally shaken, sat across from him, staring out the window, as if hoping that the darkness would bring answers to the unexplained mysteries. Sam and Lily, still trying to understand the situation, stood by the table, still shaken by the events that had taken place in the field. What now?" Mary asked, her voice trembling with anxiety. "What should we do?" "We need to figure out exactly what happened," John replied, his tone heavy with stress. "But for now, we can't take any risks. We have to stay here and be cautious." Lily, feeling the growing anxiety, clung to her mother, while Sam, clearly troubled, pondered the recent events. His mind wandered to thoughts of the strange creature that had appeared in the grain and the mysterious circles that seemed to defy everything he knew. The silence that now filled the house was almost palpable. From time to time, through the cracks in the windows, the sound of wind could be heard around the building, blending with other noises into one. Every knock, rustle, or even the rumble of a distant engine from a neighboring farm now seemed eerily loud. After an hour of silence, Mary stood up and paced the kitchen, trying to calm her nerves. "I need to check if everything's okay outside," she said, though her voice betrayed doubt. "Maybe we should see if anything has changed." John looked at her with concern, but seeing her tension, he took a deep breath. "I'll do it," he replied firmly. "You stay inside with the kids." Mary wanted to protest, but John was already standing and reaching for the flashlight. "Be careful," she whispered softly, watching as he opened the door. The cold air hit him immediately as soon as he stepped outside. He carefully closed the door behind him, the flashlight casting a faint glow into the night. John headed towards the field, where an eerie silence hung in the air. His steps were cautious, and every sound seemed more intrusive in the deep quiet. The night was dark, and the flashlight's beam cast long shadows on the ground. John moved toward the field, now empty, with the crop circles fully submerged in darkness. From time to time, he stopped to listen to the surrounding sounds, but the only thing he could hear was the faint rustling of the wind and the sounds of nature, which seemed a bit too loud tonight. Suddenly, John's flashlight illuminated something that made him stop for a moment. Shadows on the field moved unnaturally, as if an invisible object was shifting. John took a deep breath and his hands began to tremble as he realized something was approaching. "Mary!" he shouted loudly, but his voice seemed to be drowned out by the wind. Suddenly, the noise, which had been barely audible earlier, became clear. A low, pulsating sound that seemed to emanate from the ground itself. John looked up, seeing how the sky, which had been dark and still, now began to brighten with a strange greenish glow. Mary, Sam, and Lily, noticing that something was wrong, ran outside. John waited for them, still holding the flashlight. Mary rushed to John, her gaze fixed on the sky, where something utterly unbelievable appeared. In the distance, against the backdrop of the night sky, something resembling a flying saucer hung in the air. It was a metallic, gleaming object, with a shape unlike any known vehicle. The saucer hovered in the air in complete silence, except for the pulsating sound that seemed to come from inside the object. The Harper family stood in shock, staring at the strange phenomenon suspended in the sky. Mary, trying to stay calm, stayed close to John. Sam, despite his fear, filmed the event, trying to capture every detail. Lily, terrified, clung tightly to her mother, her eyes full of fear. The saucer moved slowly, spinning in the air as if it was surveying the surroundings. Its metallic surface reflected the flashlight's light, casting shimmering reflections on the ground. As the object drifted towards the farm, John felt his heart start to race. "This can't be real," John whispered, looking at the object that seemed to be approaching. "What do they want from us?" "We need to get back inside," John said, holding Mary's hand. "We can't stay outside. If that thing..." The object slowly began to rotate, and a light burst from its central section. Suddenly, a gentle yet unearthly beam shot from the inside of the vehicle, sweeping over the ground as if scanning something. When the beam passed over the family, they all felt a strange tingling on their skin, as though the air around them was suddenly filled with energy. "John," Mary whispered in a trembling voice. "What is it? What's happening?" John stood still, staring at the saucer. Two conflicting thoughts battled in his mind: the urge to run and an irrational curiosity. Finally, overcome by fear, he pulled his family toward the house. "We need to get inside. Now!" he shouted, guiding them toward the door. They rushed inside, bolting the door and covering the windows. The pulsating sound of the object, though muffled by the house's walls, still penetrated their bodies as if the air was charged with electricity. The Harper family stood in the kitchen, staring at each other in terror, not knowing what to do. Suddenly, all the lights in the house began to flicker and then went out completely. Total darkness enveloped them. Strange metallic noises echoed from all directions, as if something or someone was approaching their home. "Dad," Sam began, but he didn't get to finish. The kitchen door burst open with a bang, and a strong, green light flooded the room. In the light, 3 figures appeared, similar to the one they had seen in the field. The beings were slender, slightly hunched, with gray-green skin and large black eyes. They stood motionless in the doorway, watching them with unsettling indifference. Lily began to cry, clinging to her mother, while Sam, despite his fear, stood in front of his family as if trying to protect them. John raised his hands in a gesture of surrender, but his eyes burned with determination. "Who are you?" he shouted, his voice sounding stronger than he felt inside. "What do you want from us?" One of the beings raised a slender hand, and the air around them suddenly became thick, as if something invisible was pulling their bodies to the ground. Mary and the children felt their movements paralyzed. They couldn't move, as though their bodies were being restrained by a force they couldn't understand. The being spoke, not with a voice, but directly into their minds. The words, though quiet and devoid of emotion, filled their heads. "We do not wish to harm you." John, barely able to breathe, managed to whisper, "What do you want?" "Observation. Evolution." In an instant, the entire family felt as if their bodies were being lifted into the air. Suddenly, in the blink of an eye, the entire family found themselves back on the farm. It was already daylight, and the morning was breaking anew. The saucer was gone. John, Mary, Sam, and Lily stood stunned, looking at each other. None of them knew if what had just happened was real or merely a strange dream. However, when they later went to check the farm, full of unease, the sight of the mysterious circles in the fields confirmed to them that it had been real. One thing was certain: something had changed within them. Their gazes were full of silent understanding, and a strange, unspoken mystery hung in the air. John took a deep breath and looked at his family. "We have to forget about this," he said quietly, though he knew it was impossible. Years later, when the children had grown up and the farm had passed into the hands of a new generation, the memories of that one night still lingered deep in their hearts. Every glance at the field inevitably echoed the past events, as if they were always seeking confirmation that what they had experienced wouldn't return. Although outwardly everything seemed to return to normal, those who had witnessed that night never regained full peace. Each of them carried the weight of the secret, unseen, but palpable in subtle gestures, quiet moments, and sudden glances. John, once strong and confident, began to lose his former vigor after that night. He had always been the kind of man who could solve any problem and face any challenge, but that event changed him forever. He often wandered the fields as if searching for something he couldn't find. He never spoke aloud about what he had truly seen or felt in that moment. He carried the weight of the unspoken, and his hands, once steady, now trembled as he worked the earth. His family saw how much he had changed since that night, but no one had the courage to ask him about it. His gaze, empty and full of pain, spoke more than words ever could. Mary, on the other hand, tried to be the pillar of strength for everyone. She was the quiet, yet steadfast rock of the family. Soon after that night, she threw herself into her duties, cooking, cleaning, tending to the house and children, as if trying to drown out the unease. But even she wasn't free from memories. Sometimes, she would pause mid-movement, her hands resting on the kitchen table, her eyes wandering far beyond the window, toward the horizon. She felt the presence of something indescribable, something that gave her no peace. Even when she closed her eyes at night, though she never admitted it, she often dreamed of images she couldn't explain. In her dreams, she saw the field, and above it, something too hazy to describe. Yet she woke with a trembling heart. Their son, Sam, who had been just a child back then, grew up trying to ignore the dark part of their shared history. He always wanted to believe that the event was just a strange dream, something his mind had exaggerated out of childhood. Fear. He ran the farm with passion, started a family, but deep down he carried an unease that constantly resurfaced. Sometimes, while working in the field, he felt as though something invisible was watching him, something present yet unseen. He would quickly finish his work, convincing himself it was just his imagination. But at night, he woke up drenched in sweat, his heart racing wildly. His sister Lily, once full of life and dreams, had changed the most since that night. The light in her eyes had faded, and her joyful nature was replaced by silence and mistrust. She could no longer find happiness in the places that once filled her with energy. She often avoided conversations about the past, and when someone tried to bring up the subject, she would avert her gaze or abruptly change the topic. She knew there were no answers that could bring her peace. Sometimes she sat by the window, watching the fields she once believed in so much. Now they seemed foreign, as if they held a secret she didn't want to uncover. She often wondered who she would have become if not for that night. Each of them, in their own way, tried to find their footing in life after that night, but none succeeded in forgetting. They shared the burden of an unspoken truth, yet rarely spoke of it. Silence had become their only form of protection against whatever the past still held enchanted. Sometimes, when they all gathered together, their eyes would meet for a brief moment. and in their gaze appeared the same unspoken question. Had that night truly passed, or was it forever lodged in their hearts? Don't be afraid to speak the truth. If you have your own story, experiences, or evidence related to UFOs, please email us. Your story is important and can help others who have had similar experiences. UFO X-Files connects us. You are not alone.